Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today I'm back with another topic in Norse language and myth, specifically looking at the scene in which Odin sacrifices himself to himself by hanging himself on a tree in Hávamál, stanzas 138 to 139. Now the poem Hávamál, or as pronounced in modern Icelandic, Hávamál, is something that I've taken a special interest in for many years. Soon, my dual language edition and translation called The Wanderer's Hávamál will appear from Hackett Publishing Company. There you can see the Old Norse as taken from the original manuscript, the Codex Regius, on the left side, next to my English translation on the right side, with a commentary on the back, or accessible by clicking on the Kindle version. I've also, in my videos, gone through and done a read-through of the Old Norse text of Hávamál from stanzas 1 to 164. I did this one time in 2017, and now I'm slowly redoing it in 2019 using some of the new conclusions I've made while working on the Wanderer's Hávamál. But I wanted to take a special video to talk about the scene of Odin's hanging himself, because people show so much interest in it and are not necessarily interested in the other stanzas around it in Hávamál. And it's true that it's a fairly isolated little story. We have just two stanzas that tell us a story that is nowhere else mentioned in any source of Norse mythology from the Middle Ages. Now, it's hinted at in the way that Odin may be called the god of the hanged, or given a name like Stretched, but the story is nowhere else told. So what do these stanzas say? In Old Norse, we read, Veit ek at ek hek, vindga meði on, nætter allar níu, geri undaðar, og gefin Óðni, sjálfum mer, og þeim meði, mangi veit, hvers hann af rótum renn. Við hleyfi mig seldu nefið hornigi, nysta ek niður, nam ek upp rúnar, uppandi nam, fell ek aftur þaðan. Now let's take a look at this in some detail. I know that I hung, ek veit at ek hek. Here I'm going to go through, and when I give you a literal translation, I'm going to rephrase the Old Norse in the same word order that we would put it in English, so that you can see which words go with what. On a windy tree, or windswept tree, or vindga meði. Now I believe this may in fact be the only occurrence of that adjective vindugur, or windy, which would be cognate with English windy, in an Old Norse text. All 9 nights, allar níu nætur, so through a long procession of 9 nights. Wounded by a spear, undaðar geri. Now Odin is strongly associated with the spear. We see him called Gers Drotin by the 900s poet Egil Skallagrimsson, and already the earliest skaldic poet Bragi Borason in the early 800s calls him Gungnis Vovadar, the waver of Gungnir, his own spear. And given to Odin, or given Óðinn. Now when men are sacrificed to Odin, and we see this in a variety of different stories. We see a scene in Styrbjarnarþóttir. We see a scene in Gautrek's saga, which I've also included in the Wanderer's Hávamál because it's such a famous scene. Spears are in fact the preferred tool for giving, i.e. sacrificing men to Odin. Myself to myself, self to self, me, sjálfum mer. On that tree, o þeim meði, which no man knows, mangi veit. And then the last line is a little bit difficult. Hvers is what the manuscript says. which would be, strictly speaking, the genitive singular of hver, so this would be equivalent to English whose. And then we have he. Now, the tree is masculine in Old Norse. Meðr is a masculine word for tree. And then runs from roots, ren av rotur. Now, you can take this as from whose roots he runs. But I think that more likely what we've got is actually a mistake in the manuscript copying itself, where the scribe has written hvers instead of hvars, which would mean where. So where he runs from roots, so where the tree grows from its roots, i.e. no one has seen the roots themselves, probably. You can interpret this other ways. David A.H. Evans, among other scholars who have interpreted Hávamál, have compared this to a line in Svipdagsmál, another Eddic poem, although not one in the Codex Regius manuscript, where we see hverium rotum han ren, something like that, from which roots he runs, and talking about a tree that's probably Yggdrasil, although in that poem the tree is called Mima Meðr. But of course, we don't necessarily know that the tree that he's talking about in Hávamál is Yggdrasil. Now, I'm not saying it isn't before, before the internet comment brigade jumps on me. It is likely enough that the tree is Yggdrasil, right? That Óðinn, the king of the gods, the best of the gods, as he himself says in Grímnismál, would hang himself from the best of trees, as he calls Yggdrasil in Grímnismál. But he doesn't right out say it in Hávamál that it is Yggdrasil. And the name of Yggdrasil, the tree, does not necessarily imply that Óðinn hanged himself from it. This is sometimes assumed because the name is so weird. Drasil is a poetic word for horse. Ygr is one of Ódinn's names. So the tree's name looks like Óðinn horse. And for a long time, scholars have assumed this is kind of Norse dark humor, that Óðinn rode the tree by hanging from it. And they do talk about people riding gallows and riding hanging trees. So this would be not unexpected humor. But if it is Óðinn's horse in that way, it would actually make more sense for the name to be Yggdrasil with that possessive S, because in Old Norse, just like in English, S marks the possessive, at least of most masculine nouns, like Ygr, Ix, Óðinn, Óðins. So why isn't it Yggdrasil? Well, Anatoly Lieberman, one of the great scholars of Old Norse in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, has suggested, I think, a pretty interesting idea, and I will summarize it because this argument actually runs much longer than this. You can see it in his book, In Prayer and Laughter. What if Yggdrasil is actually an old name of Sleipnir, Ódinn's horse? In that case, Ygr, which means terrifier, something like that, would then apply to the horse as well. It's like the terrible horse, the terrifying horse, which would be appropriate to the name of a god so closely associated with death and battle and other horrors. Now, when you consider that the name of the tree is often given not as Yggdrasil itself plainly, but as Yggdrasils askr, ash tree of Yggdrasil, you may see a hint to what's happened here. Now, in Old Norse poetic language, in kennings, any man or male being can be called an askr, ash tree. This is just a very frequent poetic metaphor. So who would be the man, the ash tree of Yggdrasil, Ódinn's horse? That would be Óðinn. But then over time, poets perhaps misinterpreted the askr as being literally an ash tree and gave this name to the tree instead of to the horse. Now, we'll never really know what the sequence of events was that led to the tree being named Yggdrasil, but this is reasonably plausible given the historical semantics of Old Norse and its poetry. And, you know, we don't know what exactly the name might have been before it was Yggdrasil, if this is how it came to be called Yggdrasil. It could be Lærðr, a tree that we see mentioned in association with Valhall in Grímnismál, It could be Mima meter, as we see in Svipdagsmál. Anyway, that is a long way of saying that we need to acknowledge that Hávamál 138 does not say Óðinn hung from Yggdrasil, but it's not unlikely that it's Yggdrasil. Now let's look at 139. So what you'll see in the manuscript there is seldu, but the vowel E often stands for front umlauted vowels in Old Norse other than E. So this could, strictly speaking, be seldu. It could be, would be they gave, they sold. It could be saldu, they gave joy. It could be, as I take it, suldu, they sated, they fed. So they fed me not with Vithlavi Mixelu. I had to think about this. Vithlavi Mixelu. So they, if you just took that line on its own, it would be actually they sated me with a loaf of bread, with hlave. Ne with horningi. There we get the negative. Nor with a horn. So they did not feed me with food. They did not sate me with drink from a horn. The ne can appear without there being a negative on the first element that's being negated. I looked down, ek nista neder. I took up runes, ek nam up runar. Screaming, uppandi, I took, nam. I fell again from them. Ek fell after thadan. So, this whole sacrifice appears to have been in order to acquire runes, but we don't know what the backstory is. Why did Óðinn have to do this in order to get runes? Right? The backstory of how this is how these letters need to be acquired is never explained, and I think that it's worth contemplating, because surely there is a story here told in a lost poem or something where this was set up by someone as the price that Óðinn had to pay to learn these letters. And we simply don't know what it is. Again, this story is not told anywhere else, although Óðinn's association with hanging is quite secure in other Old Norse sources. So we really just have to sit and consider and speculate based on what we can learn from other sources in Old Norse and related Old Germanic languages, and perhaps by considering parallels with other world mythologies. For instance, of course, we know of other gods who are tortured. Prometheus, Jesus, right? But the parallels are not very strong, particularly the sacrifice of self to self. Someone, maybe Óðinn himself, set up hanging from a tree, probably dying, because it would be difficult to do that for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced with a spear without eating or drinking, and not die, in order to learn runes. And the entire thing is probably the greatest mystery in all of Norse mythology, which is loaded with mysteries. Well, I hope this has been an interesting or informative look at these stanzas for you. I particularly hope it's been a reasonably objective look, and I hope that if you enjoy this kind of deeper look into our real medieval sources of Norse myth, that you'll check out not only the more than 300 other videos on this channel, but also my upcoming book, The Wanderer's Hávamál, with the Old Norse and English text of Hávamál, as well as a full expert commentary. And for now, from beautiful Colorado, I hope you'll let me wish you all the best.